The Neighborhood Improvement District and the debt service funds were both established with the Ritchie Brothers project. A huge project for the city of Odessa is generating enough revenue to cover that debt that was issued. The debt was to provide for infrastructure, so there was extensions of water and sanitation, or wastewater, however you want to look at it, as well as electric lines out to that location. And in turn, anything between, point A and point B to take you out to Ritchie Brothers, if there's a development or something that happens, those infrastructure benefits also that entity, whoever buys that property or whoever wants to develop that piece of property, whatever's vacant out that direction. The Transportation Sales Tax Fund was moved from the general fund into its own fund based on the specifics in state statute in 2009, and that also is a half-cent sales tax that is generated by all the commerce in the city of Odessa. And that money is used to make your street improvements. Unfortunately, a couple $100,000 a year anymore doesn't make much street improvement. The pie chart for general fund is kind of weird, so we're going to make it different. Here I've identified the revenue sources for general fund. If you recall, Sunny talked about the revenue that was in the audit report. And this is how the general fund generates its revenue. You can see, well, it's hard to see, but here it talks about 56% of the revenue generated in general fund is taxes. Taxes are defined as property taxes, sales taxes, franchise fees, and those make up the majority of your revenue. There's also charges for services, because we provide ambulance services. We also provide trash service or sanitation service. There's fines and forfeitures that are generated through the police department and maybe codes, but I still think it comes through the police department. There's also donations and grants, and unfortunately in this economy the interest income is at a minimal these days. So that's kind of what makes up the general fund revenue. Here's a comparison, because we were talking about the last 10 years. So I pulled out the 2000 revenue and expenditures to fund balance and compared it to 2005, 2010. And the revenue, you see, goes up real nicely. It actually peaked in 2007 when things were really, really good, I think pretty well nationwide. In 2005 to 2010, you see a pretty significant decline in that revenue. And if you want specifics to what some of that is, then contact the office and we'll work towards that. But we're going, you can see we're almost level to what we were 10,000 years ago. In 10 years ago, in the year 2000. And that's kind of what Sunny was touching on, in the fact that the fund balances are also on the decline, because those fund balances were maintained pretty readily and at a balance almost to where they needed to be in those early years. But as things have changed and those expenditures way outweigh your revenues, then your decline in fund balance is as a result of that. And you see our expenditures have gone up and up and up, as the second bar will indicate that. And revenues for or expenditures for the general fund is very significant to personnel and general operations. There's not any capital like equipment or vehicles or anything such as that in those expenditures. Those are truly operating expenditures. The electric fund, which is one that Sunny talked about, was also in the ratios were very good in the electric fund. Electric fund has no debt. So your fees that you pay for your electricity every month pay 100% of operations and any improvements that we can make in the system. And you can see it by bullet point 3, we spent $360,000, $350,000 in the years 2000 and 2005 compared to only $89,000, $90,000 in 2010. I mean, that's probably by design, and some of it is planning and different things that need to take place as we talk about tonight as we plan for those capital expenditures and we know exactly how that money is going to be spent. Water fund is another one talked about. The ratios are really good. Here we can see that the first bar is revenue, so revenues go up very nicely in 2000 to 2005. And as our population and people start to conserve and different things happen, you know, as the economy changes, you see a decline in revenue in 2010. Again, expenses are on a steady incline, although they're not as extreme. The difference, which is the third bar, is the operating income that provides for basically your debt service payments and your capital expenditures that you would need. So when operating income needs to stay above that level of debt payments, which is the fourth bar, is where you want your operating income to kind of land so that you know that you've got plenty of money to cover your debt payments. And then capital improvements, there's been very little capital improvements done for the water fund. A lot of that is, again, you know, some of it's by design, but as we talk about some more things and some definite planning that needs to take place for expansion improvements to help with, you know, flows and pressure and all kinds of things for capital improvements for the water fund. Wastewater, in 2000, we were at a negative. We didn't have any debt in 2000 for wastewater. You know, so that's a huge indicator there on kind of what happens with wastewater. A lot of our mandates require us to make sure that water is pretty clean before we can put it back in the ground or put it in the stream for the fish to thrive in. Operating revenues are on a steady increase, which is what they need to be. Expenses go up kind of in relationship to that. You know, but that operating income, which is the third bar over, again, like water, needs to be enough to cover your debt payments and any capital improvements. And you can see in 2000 there was a little bit of capital improvements, which is the green bar all the way to the right. And then in 2005 and 6, when the wastewater plant was designed and constructed, was when capital improvements shot way up there and the wastewater fund. And we've still got constant mandates that you'll hear later about what needs to happen with the wastewater fund and what DNR and EPA is going to require the city to do as we go forward. I talked about the special revenue funds and the parks, assess the property taxes along with some user fees for park operations, and the capital equipment and improvements funds were capital equipment was a savings account, and a capital improvements is sales tax revenue. And the Ritchie Brothers development, which we thank Ritchie Brothers for everything that they're doing right now, and everything that they do helps pay for the Parks Department and provides the necessary revenue to fund the debt service that's associated with those bonds that were issued in December. And well, the sales tax that Ritchie Brothers generates, like it says there, is rebated to the special assessments. So let's talk about a neighborhood improvement district just a little bit. It's usually formed by the neighbors, and in that you agree to pay a special assessment that's equal to the debt. And so on an annual basis, you say you have that period or that amount of X for your special assessment. The way Ritchie Brothers was designed and the agreement that the city entered with them was that they were going to generate enough sales tax to rebate that back 100%. So if they generate $20,000 a year in sales tax, which is just a number off the top of my head, then the special assessment is equal to $20,000 also, because that's how much the debt payment is. So debt payment is $20,000, special assessment is $20,000, so sales tax is $20,000. So the sales tax and the special assessment come back to zero for the most part. If they don't make enough sales tax, they have to pay that. They still have to pay their special assessment. But by design, and the agreements that were done at that point in time, Ritchie Brothers says we're going to generate that sales tax. That debt's about 10 years, so it's going to take us 10 years before the city's going to reap a lot of that benefit. And once that debt's paid, and hopefully it'll pay off early, then we get all of that sales tax money. And that's what we want. I mean, that's what we're shooting for in the long run. The transportation sales tax fund, as I stated, was set up in 2009 based on state statute. It records the half-cent sales tax that was voted by the people for the sole purpose of street maintenance and improvements. So we've done, in recent years, Cox School Road, for the new school building, which has been beneficial. It's also providing a payment to buy equipment that hopefully you all see some of that equipment in use in sealing cracks and doing pavement maintenance that Paul's crew's doing a really good job with. That's the sole purpose for transportation sales tax. It would also pay any debt payments should the voters choose to issue debt to have street improvements done going forward, as we talked about. Okay, so cash flow in relationship to that, we know is provided by your taxes and your user charges, okay, and it pays for the personnel services, supplies, utilities. And so you can kind of talk about the fund balance, but you also have to look at how much cash you actually have available to make that happen. You also have restricted cash. So if you've got $8 million in the bank, for example, and maybe there's only 4 of it that you can touch, because we've got a debt service reserve that we have to fund. We were talking about not having enough funding for some of the sewer requirements. That money is slated there in the debt service requirements. Also, every customer pays a deposit. And so that money is not ours, that's your all's. You earn interest on it, and it would pay a utility bill or it comes back to you should you move from point A to point B. So we look at all those, and just because you have X number of dollars in the bank doesn't necessarily mean that you have all that available to you to spend. And so we're going to talk right now, we've watched that cash actually change. Based on the audit reports, we pull out the cash available in electric park capital improvements. No change in the debt service because that's not supposed to change, it's supposed to always be 0. Has gone up, as we collect money, through our electric rates and through our park fees and our taxes for parks and that capital improvement. Sales tax money kind of fluctuates a little bit, even though most of it goes to water to pay debt. You saw significant changes in general fund water, wastewater, the capital equipment fund, has gone down. Neighborhood improvement district cash went down by design because that money was provided for those infrastructure improvements. So as you spent that infrastructure improvement, and made that improvement happen, then naturally you're going to use that cash to make that happen. But the big thing is in general fund and wastewater in the fact that those cash balances went down by significant percentages over the last year, and that's just between 2009 and 2010. Any questions? More questions? Audience questions? Confuse you completely? Thank you.
I'm Clark Thompson with Larkin Group, engineers for the city. I'm here to talk about some of the needs that you have. We start out with first priority needs, or phase 1 needs. Your water system has some things that need to be done. There's a trihalomethane in the water which is formed when chlorine is put in the basin that has algae in it. And so there's some things we need to do there to prevent that and get you below the new standards on trihalomethanes to make the drinking water more safe for everyone. Also at the water plant, chemicals are used and filters backwards, so there's water and sludge that goes into 2 basins out there. And they fill up eventually, and the water overflows. That has to meet certain standards going, even though it goes into the ditch along the railroad there, still has to meet standards for pH and chlorine residual. So the state has basically said you need to take that water and send it to your wastewater system, or treat that water as it comes out of that facility. Well, the chosen alternative there is the lift station and connection to the sewer system to avoid that problem and not have to worry about that discharge permit at that facility. Then there's a pump up the tower that needs to be replaced. When you add those up, those things have to be done almost, near future, okay? We call them immediate, $550,000 worth of improvements. The lagoons I was talking about up at the water plant have, with time, filled up with sludge, and they need to be cleaned out. Also, that's an expense. And you might get by for a little while, but you're going to need to do that. So there we are. We're up to $800,000 for water system needs. The wastewater priorities, we've got the must-do items at the top. The Southeast Lagoon facility, we had 2 cells out there that had to be closed out. There's a contract that's been led on that, and I think the work will take place soon. The Northwest Lagoon facility will have to provide disinfection within the next couple years. They're making every city disinfect all the wastewater effluent going out of lagoons and treatment plants that are discharged into the water. So if you use chlorine to disinfect, then you have to use other chemicals to take the chlorine out after that. So you've got an expense there that is looming. There'll be a deadline, but basically we've got about 1.5 to 2 years on that. And it takes that long to do the engineering reports, get through the reviewing agencies, get a contractor and bill. There's some valve replacement that needs to take place. So we've listed immediate wastewater needs at $1.1 million. So you really don't have a choice on those. Then we come down to operational needs, other needs at your wastewater treatment facility, your main wastewater treatment facility, Southeast Wastewater Treatment Plant. Sludge dewatering has been a problem out there, and they need a sludge dewatering equipment, press and everything put in. There's some other plant piping that needs to be done. So we're up to $1,500,000 on wastewater. You have an older sewer system. It's very common throughout the state. Sewers leak, the manholes leak, so that water gets into your system. It takes up the capacity in both your sewer lines and your treatment plant, causes problems. Therefore, as a condition of your permits, the state requires that you work on your I&I. They call it I&I, infiltration and inflow. Basically, it's broken sewers, cracked sewers, old connections that weren't done right. Sometimes foundation drains in houses. Some people may have roof drains. Their gutters actually connected down into the sewer. Those things need to come off. The city's going to find those, work on looking at the system, and make improvements. It's going to be an ongoing process. So one of the first steps is to get the system TV inspected. That tells you the condition of the pipe, the condition of the manholes, and helps you plan for where you spend those funds so they aren't wasted. $150,000 a year is a recommended budget for attacking your I&I problem. You at least have to do something every year, because Paul has to fill out a report every year and tell the state what he's done. And since it's a condition of your permits, you know, he's got to have something to show. Otherwise it gets a little tough. So, next slide. Summary, water needs, 800,000, wastewater, 1.5 million, I&I needs, 250,000. You must have about $2 million. For the priority needs, you would be spending somewhere between $2 million and $2.6 million in the next few years. And that just keeps you where you need to be. Phase 2, there's more things coming down the line. Unfortunately, or fortunately, you have 3 treatment facilities in this town. So you've got a southwest lagoon, and the permit requires that we remove ammonia from lagoons. Lagoons have trouble doing that in the wintertime. So there's some things that need to be done out there. Southeast plant is going to need some more improvements. These are phase 2 and beyond, so it's coming in the future. Southeast plant, 2.5 million. Eventually, you're going to need a new treatment facility in the northwest, and you will have invested about $1 million in disinfection up there. That is designed so that it will work for the future plant that's going to be built up in that area. There's been some preliminary plan work done in that area, but a new treatment plant up there is going to cost about $8 million. And then, just over the years, I&I rehab, you'll probably end up spending a couple $1 million. Water wells and plant work. Every few years, wells have to be treated out at the water plant, out at the well field, and there's continuing changes in regulations, improvements that need to be done at the water plant. So we're budgeting in phase 2 at least $1 million for those things at the plant and well. Water system, pressure problem areas, possible water storage coming in the future, $1.5 million. So phase 2 out there, you know, several years, but you're talking about $16 million worth of things that will need to be done in this community as you grow. Stormwater, there are needs in the city for better drainage and stormwater improvements. $1 to $2 million. Electric system, it was noted that you hadn't invested a lot lately in that. There will be costs there. And streets always need improvement. So over a period of years. You're not going to be doing these phase 2 things right away, but that's kind of what we're looking at as far as long-term planning.
Clark, can I ask you to address one thing? Can you talk a little bit about, if the city doesn't do the emergent problem things, what clout does the state have to impose their will to mandate us to do that?
Well, first what happens if you're in violation, the state will issue what's called a notice of violation. If you don't do what they tell you you have to do as a permit condition. After notice of violation, they'll give you a schedule, and if you still don't do it, then there'll be a consent decree, a legal action, which will have an enforceable schedule put in. Plus, they have the ability to fine $10,000 a day for every occurrence. Every day is an occurrence. So, if you got to cross that line, every day is $10,000. Yes.
Are there any variances to these various mandates? Can you go to the General Assembly or somebody and say, hey, we don't have the money and we're not going to procedurally have it. Can we make some adjustments?
There is a variance procedure, but it's difficult to get a variance. It's getting tougher and tougher, really, to get those through, because you're really just delaying it. All you're doing is buying a little bit of time in those situations. You're still going to end up having to do the improvement.
I was just asking Joey if that impacts us from getting future funding if we're out of compliance and not pursuing a remedy, and he said yes.
Yeah, the bond covenants are very specific about getting future bonds. I think you asked that question. You were also asking the question about our covenants and the restrictions that it puts on it. To go get bonds, the most attractive way possible is through the state revolving loan fund, which you've already accessed, less than 2% interest, fixed, 20 years. If you're not in compliance or if you're not up to your covenants, you will not be able to get that kind of funding. You may be able to go to the market, but you're going to pay a lot more in interest.
Any more questions? Yes.
Will it affect the wildlife drinking out of them lagoons? Because a year ago we had swans out there and they were possibly killed by the water.
Well, basically what happens in a lagoon is you have a natural breakdown of the waste material by natural bacteria and sunlight. So it's a natural process. There's not chemicals put in the lagoon or anything. So normally you wouldn't have trouble with wildlife on lagoons.
But these were trumpeter swans from far out.
Well, I don't have any direct knowledge on that, so.
One over there.
Yes.
Is it possible the public expenses that you have listed, is it possible those will increase
The expenses in phase 2?
in any of them, phase 1?
Well, I think phase 1 we're pretty good on. We've got good budgets on those now. Phase 2 is kind of a cloud here of a bunch of things, and the regulations change. The environmental emphasis is more and more each year, so everybody's having to do a lot better job on treating water for drinking and also treating wastewater.
But if you put phase 1 off, it will go up, the cost.
But if you put phase 1 off, of course costs are going to rise.
Well, in phase 1, particularly on the water, does that include the design and inspection costs for the engineers?
Yes, that includes the design, yes.
The
It's a
quotes?
budget cost, yes.
It's everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Are the phase 2 items and beyond, are those in today's dollars or?
Those are in today's dollars because we can't really guess at when they're going to be done for sure and what the conditions are. So, yeah, it's in today's dollars. Yes.
On the phase 2, the southeast lagoon, you have $2.5 million for that. Is there some kind of backing for that number or reason for that such a large number in a new plant?
Yeah, it's in there's an engineering report that was done a master plan for the city, and it outlined some improvements that were needed out there as far as capacity. You've got a couple things going on. You've got, when it rains, you've got a lot of water. So your facility has to have some upgrades to be able to handle the high flows and treat everything. Because we don't want to be in violation for not treating part of it.